Sir, can I ask what you're doing here?
Waiting for my flight.
I need to see some ID and proof you're supposed to be in this lounge.
May I ask why?
We received a complaint about someone who might not belong here.
What exactly does someone who belongs here look like?
Dispatch, send me another unit to the Polaris Lounge. Sir, keep your hands where I can see them.
A black man, sitting alone, in a first-class airport lounge. He had a briefcase. He had a boarding pass. He had a coffee going cold in his hand. And a uniformed officer decided all that still wasn't enough reason for him to be there. What happened next would shake an entire police department, go viral across the country, and force one very embarrassed officer to face something he never expected of a man who didn't just outrank him in dignity. He outranked him on a federal badge. Before we dive deeper into this absolutely shocking story, hit that subscribe button if you believe in holding authority figures accountable when they abuse their power. His name was Marcus Webb, 47 years old. Salt and pepper beard, sharp eyes, and a quiet confidence that came not from arrogance but from 30 years of earning it. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus was sitting in the United Airlines Polaris Lounge at Chicago O'Hare Airport, a lounge that required either a business class ticket or a premium membership to enter. He had both. He'd been flying this route for over a decade. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't loud. He was reading a case file, sipping his coffee, and waiting for a flight to Washington, D.C., a flight he took at least twice a month. Normal, calm, invisible, the way black men in professional spaces learn to be invisible just to survive. But invisible wasn't enough for Officer Dale Pruitt that morning. So what exactly did Officer Pruitt see that Marcus didn't? Officer Dale Pruitt was 26 years old, 3 years on the force, and assigned to airport patrol. He had a record of proactive policing, which, if you read between the lines of the supervisor's reports, meant he stopped people a lot, mostly people who looked like Marcus. At 9:14 a.m., Pruitt entered the Polaris Lounge after a lounge staff member later identified only as a concerned employee placed a call to airport security. The complaint? A man appeared out of place. Pruitt spotted Marcus immediately. I walked over slowly. I stood over him, and in the voice people use when they've already made up their mind, said, "Sir, can I ask what you're doing here?" Marcus looked up slowly from his file. He'd heard that tone before, many times, in many rooms. But this time, something was different. Marcus didn't move. He smiled. "I'm going to need to see some ID, sir, and proof you're supposed to be in this lounge." Marcus set down his coffee, folded his case file slowly, looked Officer Pruitt directly in the eye. "You want to tell me why?" he asked. Calm, no aggression, just a simple, firm question. Pruitt stiffened. He wasn't used to being questioned back. "We received a complaint. Standard procedure." A complaint about what exactly? Pruitt shifted his weight. About someone who may not belong here. Marcus let that sentence hang in the air for a moment. Let it reveal exactly what it was. Then he said, "I have a boarding pass, a lounge membership, and every right to sit here. But tell me, what does someone who belongs here look like to you?" Pruitt's jaw tightened. He radioed for backup, and that radio call was the moment Dale Pruitt's career began to unravel. Within 4 minutes, 2 more officers arrived. Officer Chun and Officer Braddock, both experienced, both immediately sensing something Pruitt did not. The man they were called to handle wasn't nervous. He wasn't defensive. He was almost eerily composed, watching him the way someone watches a situation they've seen play out before and already know the ending to. Chin leaned toward Pruitt and whispered, "What exactly is the complaint here?" "Suspicious person. Not cooperating." Chin looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at Chun with patient, almost tired eyes. The kind of eyes that have looked into too many blue uniforms and learned to wait. Braddock noticed the case file. The government-issue briefcase. The American Airlines Senator card tucked in Marcus's breast pocket. Something wasn't adding up. Braddock was about to find out exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. Braddock cleared his throat, took a step forward, not aggressively measured. "Sir, I apologize for the disruption. Can you just help us understand the situation here?" Marcus nodded. I appreciated the shift in tone. "I fly out of here twice a month. I've been a lounge member for 8 years. I am sitting here, doing work, causing no disturbance. And what kind of work? Pruitt jumped in, unable to help himself. Marcus looked at him. Federal work. Pruitt actually laughed a little. A short, dismissive sound. Federal work. Right. What agency? Marcus reached into his jacket. Slowly, deliberately, the way you move when you know every eye in the room is watching. He placed something flat and gleaming on the table. A badge. FBI. And not just any badge. The title on the credentials beneath it made Officer Chin go pale. Supervisory Special Agent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Chicago Field Office. Senior rank. Decades of service. A man who had led federal investigations that made the news, though you'd never know his name from the headlines, because that's how Marcus Webb operated. Quietly, effectively. The three officers stood in silence. Pruitt's backup radio crackled. He didn't respond. Chin took a small, unconscious step backward. Braddock, to his credit, straightened up and said, "Agent Webb, I sincerely apologize. This should not have happened." Pruitt, however, said nothing. He was calculating, reassessing, trying to find a way to walk this back. But Marcus Webb had been a federal agent for 30 years. He'd interviewed killers, dismantled crime rings, and sat across from people far more dangerous than a young airport cop with bad judgment. He wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. But what Marcus did next shocked even the officers who were on his side. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small black notebook. "Your name?" he asked Pruitt, voice still even. "I what?" "Your name, officer, badge number, and the name of the staff member who filed a complaint." Pruitt blinked. "I'm not sure I have to. You called 3 officers to confront a man sitting quietly in a public lounge. You have no probable cause, no reported crime, nothing but a phone call about someone who looked out of place." Marcus wrote something in the notebook. "I want names. All of them." Officer Chin provided his own immediately. Braddock did the same. Pruitt hesitated, then slowly gave him. What none of them knew yet was that Marcus wasn't writing this down for himself. He was writing it down for the investigation he was about to trigger. After the officer stepped back, Marcus stood up, moved to a quieter corner of the lounge, and made a phone call. He spoke quietly for about 90 seconds. No raised voice. No drama. When he came back, he sat down, picked up his coffee cold now, and returned to his case file. 30 minutes later, while Pruitt was still in the lounge completing a report he had no idea how to write, his own radio crackled. "Dispatch. Pruitt, your watch commander wants you to call in. Now." Pruitt frowned, stepped outside, called in. His watch commander's voice was different from usual. Tight, careful. "Pruitt, tell me exactly what happened in the Polaris lounge." And then the watch commander said a name that made Pruitt's stomach drop. Marcus Webb's name was one that the Chicago field office knew very, very well. Here's what Dale Pruitt didn't know about Marcus Webb. 30 years ago, Marcus had entered the FBI as one of a handful of black agents in his graduating class. He'd worked narcotics, organized crime, and counterterrorism. He'd testified before Congress. He'd trained a generation of younger agents. He'd also, 17 years ago, filed a landmark internal discrimination complaint that changed how the Bureau handled racial bias cases, a complaint that was sealed, but whose effects rippled through every field office in the country. Marcus Webb had been fighting this kind of battle long, before Dale Pruitt was born, and he had won, consistently. The watch commander wasn't just nervous because Marcus was a senior FBI. He was nervous because Marcus was the kind of man who followed through, and this time was going to be no different. By noon, airport management had launched its own internal review. The staff member who made the original call, a 23-year-old lounge attendant named Brittany, was asked to explain her complaint. She was tearful, visibly shaken. He didn't look like the usual people in there, she admitted. What does the usual person look like? Her manager asked. Silence. She didn't have an answer, not one she could say out loud. Her manager, a black woman named Diane, who had worked her way up from baggage handling to terminal management, looked at her for a long moment. I want you to think very carefully about what you're telling me, Diane said quietly. Brittany started to cry. But tears, as Diane knew and Marcus knew and history knows, are not accountability. What happened next in that management office would force the entire airport to take a hard look at itself. A frequent traveler in the lounge, a retired attorney named Gerald Foster, had recorded the entire incident on his phone. Quietly, discreetly, from his seat near the window. He hadn't planned to post it. He'd planned to offer it as a witness document if needed. But Gerald's daughter, who he'd mentioned it to that evening over dinner, convinced him otherwise. By the next morning, the video was on Twitter. By afternoon, it had 2 million views. The footage showed everything: the approach, the demand, the backup, the badge, and most powerfully, the moment Marcus Webb sat back down and picked up his case file, while 3 officers stood around him, suddenly unsure what to do with their hands. The comments were one thing, but the phone ringing in the Chicago police superintendent's office was another. By the second day, it wasn't just social media. It was the Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times, CNN. Fox News covered it from 3 different angles, none of them flattering to Pruitt. Former FBI colleagues of Marcus gave interviews, carefully measured, speaking about a man of profound integrity, a man who had never once, in 30 years, abused his authority, a man who had every right to be angry and chose, as he had always chosen, to be strategic instead. Civil rights organizations called for a formal review of airport policing practices. A state senator requested a hearing. The ACLU filed a formal inquiry. And through all of it, Marcus Webb gave exactly one statement: I want systemic change. Not an apology. 5 words, cutting through 100 news cycles. But behind the scenes, something far more specific was already being set in motion. What the public didn't know was that Officer Dale Pruitt had 2 prior complaints in his file, both from black men. Both involved stops with no probable cause. Both marked unsubstantiated, which, in department language, meant they'd been buried. Marcus's notebook had led investigators directly to those files. When Internal Affairs pulled the records, they found a pattern. Not just Pruitt, a cluster of officers. Same patrol zone, same lounge, same type of complaint. Someone had been selectively patrolling the airport's premium spaces, and they hadn't been subtle about it. The investigation that Marcus's notebook triggered wasn't about one incident anymore. It was about a system. And the man who built that system was about to be very surprised by a knock on his door. Lieutenant Ray Kowalski supervised Pruitt's unit. He was a 20-year veteran with a reputation for keeping the terminals clean. He'd been quietly proud of his team's stop rate. He was not proud now, because among the things Internal Affairs found in those files was an email sent by Kowalski to his officers 3 years ago. Premium areas need active monitoring. Use your judgment. Use your judgment. 3 words that, in court, under the right scrutiny, with the right pattern of stops attached to them, looked a lot like a directive. Kowalski had a lawyer by Friday. Pruitt had one by Wednesday. And the lounge attendant Brittany had quietly requested a transfer to a different terminal, which was denied pending the investigation. Nobody was escaping this quietly. But Marcus Webb still had one more card to play. On a quiet Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus Webb walked into a meeting room at the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. Across the table, the Chicago police superintendent, the airport CEO, a city attorney, and 2 members of the city council. Marcus came alone. He placed his notebook on the table, placed a folder beside it, and for the next 40 minutes, he didn't raise his voice once. He laid out a full picture: the incident, the prior complaints, the email, the pattern, the systemic failure, and what he was asking for, not in anger, but in the clear, organized language of a man who had spent 30 years building federal cases. When he finished, the room was silent. The superintendent spoke first. "What do you need from us?" What Marcus asked for next was something nobody in that room expected. Marcus didn't ask for Pruitt's firing. He didn't ask for public shaming. He asked for 3 things. 1, a mandatory implicit bias retraining program for all airport patrol officers, reviewed by an independent civilian board. 2, a formal audit of every stop made in airport premium areas over the past 5 years, cross-referenced by race. There is a standing community advisory committee with real authority to review complaints, not just receive them. No lawsuits, no press conference with lawyers, no viral moment of retribution, just structural, lasting change. The city attorney looked at his notes. The superintendent looked at Marcus. The airport CEO looked relieved and guilty at the same time. One council member, a young woman named Priya Chandran, leaned forward and said, "Done. All 3. When can you start working with us?" But not everyone in that room was as willing as Priya to move forward. The airport senior legal counsel, a man named Harris, in an expensive suit, practiced neutrality and raised his hand. "We want to ensure any audit is conducted under attorney-client privilege and—" Marcus turned and looked at him slowly. "This isn't a legal negotiation, counselor. This is a conversation about what's right. The privilege question is for another room." Harris opened his mouth again. The superintendent put his hand up. "Harris, enough." It was a small moment, but it was the moment the room shifted. Because the most powerful person in that room had just signaled whose side he was on, not out of guilt, but because the math was simple. Marcus Webb was right, and everyone sitting there knew it. Pruitt received a suspension without pay the following week. Lieutenant Kowalski was placed under formal review, but the story wasn't over yet. One final, stunning turn was still coming. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus received an envelope at his office. Handwritten, no return address, Chicago postmark. Inside was a letter from Brittany. She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame her upbringing, her environment, her training. She just wrote in careful, earnest sentences about what she had felt in that moment. The unconscious alarm, the assumption, the call she made without thinking. And then she wrote, "I've been asking myself every day since then, what does someone who belongs somewhere look like? I don't have an answer yet, but I'm not going to stop asking." She'd enrolled in a community course on racial equity. She'd asked her manager, Diane, to mentor her. Marcus read the letter twice, thought for a long time. Then he wrote back. What Marcus said in that reply became something Brittany would carry with her for the rest of her life. Marcus Webb's letter to Brittany was 2 paragraphs. He never shared it publicly. Brittany did years later, with his permission, when she was speaking at a training seminar for airport staff. He wrote, "Accountability is not the end of a person. It's the beginning of a better one, if they choose it. I don't need your guilt. I need your change. The country needs your change. That is enough.